One moment, I was a husband, a father, and a man who believed he had everything under control. The next, I was holding a lifeless piece of paper that claimed my wife, Elena, was gone forever. They said it was a boating accident, a freak storm that caught them by surprise. The authorities searched for days, but when they couldn't find her body, they handed me their condolences and a flimsy death certificate. I remember staring at it, trying to process the words. Deceased. How could that apply to Elena, my vibrant, unpredictable, and fiercely beautiful wife? I had no choice but to accept it. People grieve differently, they said, but what they didn't tell me was that grief has layers. It wasn't just the loss of my wife. It was the unraveling of everything we had built. Our home, once full of laughter, became a hollow shell. I couldn't sleep in our bed without hearing her voice or imagining her walking through the door. My kids, God, my kids, they kept asking when mommy was coming back. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that mommy isn't coming back, ever? The days turned into weeks, then months. Friends and family rallied around me at first, but grief is a lonely process. People don't know how to stick around for the long haul, and eventually, it was just me and the kids. I threw myself into being a father, trying to fill the void Elena had left behind. Every soccer game, every parent-teacher meeting, every bedtime story. I showed up because I had to, not because I wanted to, but because there was no other option. The world kept moving forward, and so did I, but something about Elena's death never sat right with me. Maybe it was the lack of closure. No body, no real evidence beyond a few eyewitness accounts of the storm. Maybe it was the way she seemed distracted in the weeks leading up to the accident. I chalked it up to stress at the time. I mean, we all have our moments, don't we? But then there were the little things. The sudden withdrawals from our joint account, the cryptic phone calls she brushed off as work-related, the way she started packing up random things around the house. I wanted to confront her, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. And then she was gone, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. Looking back, I was blind. Blinded by love, by trust, by the belief that Elena could never hurt me. I should have seen the signs, but hindsight is a cruel teacher. At the time, I was just a broken man trying to piece his life back together. I became a shell of the man I once was. The confident, ambitious James was gone, replaced by a version of myself I didn't recognize. I started avoiding mirrors because I couldn't stand the haunted look in my eyes. My kids were the only thing that kept me grounded. Their laughter, their innocence. It reminded me that life goes on, even when you feel like it shouldn't. Still, there were nights when the silence was unbearable. Nights when I stared at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I had with Elena, every moment that felt off, trying to find the missing puzzle piece. I didn't know it then, but I was living in the shadow of a lie so massive it would take me years to uncover it. For 2 years, I mourned her. I let the world see my grief, let them call me a strong single father and a dedicated family man. I played my part because that's what society expects, isn't it? To suffer quietly, to carry on with dignity. But deep down, I wasn't just grieving. I was questioning. What if? What if she wasn't gone? What if there was more to the story? Of course, these thoughts felt like betrayal. How could I, as her husband, doubt her death? What kind of man entertains the possibility that his wife, the mother of his children, might have orchestrated her own disappearance? It felt insane, cruel even, to think such a thing. So I buried it. I buried it deep, along with the parts of me that still wanted to believe in her. But the thing about the truth is, it doesn't stay buried forever. It has a way of clawing its way to the surface, demanding to be seen. And when it did, when I finally found out what Elena had done, it wasn't just grief I felt. It was rage. Pure, unfiltered rage that burned away every ounce of love I had for her. And that's when the plan started forming. Quietly, in the back of my mind, a seed of revenge took root. I didn't know how or when, but one thing was certain. When the time came, I wouldn't just make her regret what she'd done. I'd make sure she remembered it for the rest of her life. I never expected the truth to hit me like a freight train on an otherwise ordinary day. It was 2 years after Elena's supposed death, and I was finally beginning to find a semblance of normalcy. The kids were thriving in school, and I had found a routine that kept the crushing weight of loneliness at bay. But then, out of nowhere, everything unraveled. It started innocently enough. I was picking up groceries when I ran into an old friend of ours, Tessa. She was one of those people who never stopped talking, the kind of person you avoid when you're in a rush. But that day, I didn't mind. Her chatter was a welcome distraction, at least until she said something that froze me in place. I thought I saw Elena the other day. I know it sounds crazy, but it was her. Same hair, same walk, even that scarf she loved so much. She was with some guy in Charleston. I didn't want to say anything because, well, you know, but I couldn't shake the feeling. My heart stopped. The blood drained from my face, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse. I tried to laugh it off, saying something about mistaken identity, but Tessa's words lodged themselves in my brain like a splinter. Could it be true? Could Elena really be alive? The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions, cooking dinner, helping with homework, but my mind was elsewhere. That night, after the kids were asleep, I pulled out the box of keepsakes I had hidden in the closet. Photos of Elena, her letters, even her favorite necklace. I needed to remind myself of the woman I had loved, the woman I had buried. But instead of comfort, all I found were more questions. If Elena was alive, why would she leave us? Why would she put me through hell, let her children grow up without their mother? It didn't make sense. But then again, neither did her death. The vague explanations, the lack of evidence. It all started to add up in the most horrifying way. I couldn't let it go. I told myself it was for the kids, that they deserved to know the truth, but deep down, it was about me. I needed answers, even if they destroyed me. So, I hired a private investigator, a quiet, unassuming man named David who had a reputation for digging up the impossible. I gave him everything I had, Elena's last known whereabouts, her social security number, even the financial records that had nagged at me for years. And then, I waited. The wait was agonizing. Every phone call from David felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Days turned into weeks, and I started to question whether I was chasing ghosts. But then, one night, the call came. Mr. Harper, I found her. I could barely breathe as he explained what he had discovered. Elena was alive. Not just alive, thriving. She was living in Charleston under a new name, married to a man named Julian. They owned a quaint little cafe on the waterfront, a picture-perfect life that made my stomach churn. David sent me photos, Elena laughing with Julian, walking hand in hand along the beach, completely at ease in her new world. I stared at those photos for hours, my hands shaking with rage. She looked happy, carefree, as if the life she left behind meant nothing. As if I meant nothing. My first instinct was to confront her, to demand answers, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the thought of my kids, or maybe it was the cold, calculated part of me that realized revenge was a dish best served cold. Instead, I started planning. I told no one, not even David. This wasn't just about confronting Elena. This was about dismantling the fantasy she had built for herself. She had faked her death, abandoned her family, and created a lie so elaborate it almost fooled me. Almost. But now, I had the upper hand. I began gathering evidence, financial records, legal documents, anything that proved Elena's deception. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, there would be no escape for her. I didn't just want answers. I wanted justice. But justice wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, to understand what she had done to me and our children. I wanted her to see the pain she had caused, to know that the life she had stolen from us would never be hers to enjoy. For months, I kept up appearances, playing the role of the doting father and successful entrepreneur. No one knew the storm brewing inside me. Every smile, every laugh, every casual conversation was a mask. Beneath it all, I was a man consumed by rage, a man waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment was coming. I could feel it. The time would come when Elena would have to face me, and when she did, she would regret every choice she had made. She thought she could bury the past, but the past has a way of clawing its way back to the surface. She had no idea what was coming, but I did, and that knowledge was enough to keep me going. For now, it's strange how pain can either break you or shape you into something unrecognizable. For me, it did both. In the years following the discovery of Elena's betrayal, I was a man split into two. One half of me was still grieving, still drowning in the memories of what we had and the lies she left behind. But the other half, the part fueled by anger and determination, refused to let her win. That half made me stronger, sharper, and, most importantly, patient. I didn't confront her. Not yet. What would be the point? She wasn't the woman I once loved, and I wasn't the same man she thought she had left behind. The weak, devastated James was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizably focused. If she wanted to play games, she learned the hard way that I had rewritten the rules. My transformation started small. I began taking better care of myself, mentally, physically, financially. I woke up earlier, hit the gym, and learned to channel my anger into something productive. The weight of my responsibilities as a single father was crushing, but I used it to fuel my resolve. Every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself of why I couldn't. My kids needed me, and I needed to prove to myself that I could do this without her. Work became my sanctuary. I poured myself into my business, expanding it beyond what I had ever dreamed possible. It wasn't just about success. It was about building something that couldn't be taken away from me. Something that proved I was more than the broken man Elena had left behind. People started noticing the change. My friends, my colleagues, even strangers. They'd compliment me on my glow up, as they called it, not knowing the fire that fueled it. I didn't need their validation, but it was a reminder that I was doing something right. For the first time in years, I felt in control of my life. But beneath the surface, I was still calculating. Every move I made was part of a larger plan. While the world saw a man thriving, I was quietly gathering the tools I needed for my revenge. Every financial success, every connection I built, every resource I acquired. It was all for the day I would confront Elena and make her pay for what she had done. Raising the kids alone was the hardest part, but also the most rewarding. They didn't just need a father, they needed a protector, a guide. Someone who could teach them that life doesn't stop when people betray you. I made it my mission to be that person for them, even when it felt impossible. There were nights when the weight of it all would hit me like a tidal wave. Nights when I'd sit in the dark, staring at the photos of Elena's new life, wondering what I had done to deserve this. But those moments were fleeting. I couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity, not when I had a plan to execute. Over time, I began to see my pain differently. It wasn't just a wound, it was a weapon. Every sleepless night, every tear, every ounce of rage I had felt became fuel for the fire burning inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing to show Elena that she hadn't destroyed me, preparing to take back control of the narrative she thought she had written. I started imagining how it would feel to see her again. Would she recognize me? Would she see the man she had left behind? Or would she see what I had become? The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. I knew I couldn't let emotion cloud my judgment when the time came. This wasn't about love or hate. It was about justice. Cold, calculated justice. The years flew by faster than I expected. The kids grew up, and so did I. I became a man I could be proud of. A man who had rebuilt his life from the ashes of betrayal. But even as I moved forward, the past lingered like a shadow. I couldn't fully escape it, not until I had confronted Elena and laid it to rest. And so, I waited. I watched. I planned. I knew the day would come when our paths would cross again. And when it did, I wouldn't just confront her. I'd dismantle the fantasy she had built for herself piece by piece. I would show her that the man she had tried to destroy was stronger than ever. The old James would have forgiven her, maybe even begged her to come back. But the man I had become? He didn't forgive, and he didn't forget. He was a man reborn, and he was ready to make her regret every decision that had led her to this moment. It was supposed to be a celebration, a day filled with joy, laughter, and family. My eldest daughter had just received her college admission letter, and I decided to throw a grand party in her honor. It wasn't just about her success. It was about us as a family. We had survived the impossible, rebuilt from the ashes, and thrived in ways I never thought possible. This event was a testament to our resilience, to the strength we had forged through pain. The preparations were meticulous. I spared no expense, renting out a beautiful venue and ensuring every detail was perfect. Friends, family, and colleagues from all walks of life were invited. It was meant to be a day of pride and unity, but deep down, I knew it would be so much more. You see, I had a feeling she would come. Elena. I had carefully planted the seeds, dropping mentions of the event in conversations with mutual acquaintances, ensuring the news would find its way to her. I knew her well enough to predict her reaction. She wouldn't be able to resist. Whether it was curiosity, guilt, or arrogance, she would show up, and when she did, I would be ready. The day of the party arrived, and the atmosphere was electric. Guests mingled, glasses clinked, and laughter filled the air. My daughter was glowing, surrounded by people who adored her, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. I kept a close eye on the entrance, waiting for the moment I knew was inevitable. And then, she walked in. Time seemed to slow as I saw her step through the door, hand in hand with Julian. She looked different. Older, of course, but still carrying that air of confidence that once captivated me. The room fell silent as people recognized her, their eyes darting between her and me, confusion and shock etched on their faces. Whispers spread like wildfire, and I could feel the tension rising. She had the audacity to smile, as if this was some kind of reunion, as if we were old friends reconnecting after years apart. Julian stood beside her, looking smug and oblivious, like a man who believed he had won some great prize. I almost laughed at the irony. I approached them slowly, my expression calm and unreadable. The crowd parted as I moved, their eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Elena's smile faltered as I stopped in front of her, the weight of my presence finally sinking in. "James," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I thought it was time. Time to see the kids, to reconnect. I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Save it, Elena. This isn't your moment." Her mouth snapped shut, and the color drained from her face. I turned to the crowd, raising my voice so everyone could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my tone measured and icy, "allow me to reintroduce you to my wife, Elena. You might remember her as the woman who tragically passed away 10 years ago, leaving me to raise our children alone." Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by a flurry of murmurs. I continued, ignoring the chaos. "But as you can see, her death was greatly exaggerated. In fact, Elena didn't die at all. She simply decided to fake her death, abandon her family, and start a new life with her lover." I gestured toward Julian, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Elena's eyes were wide with panic, her composure cracking under the weight of the revelation. "I know this is shocking for many of you," I said, my voice growing colder. "But what's even more shocking is the lengths she went to deceive us all. The stolen money, the lies, the complete disregard for the family she left behind." I pulled out a remote and clicked a button, and a large screen lit up behind me. Photos of Elena and Julian flashed across the screen. Walking along the beach, running their cafe, laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. The room erupted in chaos as guests turned to Elena, their faces a mix of disgust and disbelief. Elena tried to speak, her voice cracking. "James, please, I can explain." "Explain?" I interrupted, my voice sharp as a blade. "Explain how you left your children without a mother? Explain how you let me mourn you for years while you played house with him?" I pointed at Julian, who was now inching away, clearly wanting no part of the confrontation. The crowd watched in stunned silence as I took a step closer to her, lowering my voice but making sure everyone could hear. "You don't get to come back here and act like you're entitled to forgiveness or understanding. You made your choice, Elena, and now you'll live with the consequences." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment she realized the depth of her betrayal and the extent of the damage she had caused. "I wanted you to see this," I said, gesturing to the room, to the family she had abandoned. "I wanted you to see what you gave up. But don't mistake this for an invitation to return. You're not welcome here, Elena. Not now, not ever." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving her to face the stunned, judgmental eyes of the crowd. It was her turn to feel abandoned, her turn to feel the weight of being unwanted. And as I rejoined my children, holding them close, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. The reunion wasn't just about her showing up. It was about me showing her who I had become. Without her, beyond her, better than she could ever imagine. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. They say that revenge is sweet, but it's not the sweetness that lingers. It's the silence that follows the blow. The silence of realization, of defeat, of a truth so undeniable that it swallows every excuse, every plea, every last shred of dignity. That was the silence that fell in the room as I revealed everything. After leaving Elena to stew in the awkward stares of the crowd, I returned to the podium, calm and collected. The party had descended into chaos, with people whispering, staring, and even filming the spectacle. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Since we're all gathered here to celebrate family, I began, my voice carrying over the murmurs. Let's talk about the lengths we go to protect it, and the lengths some go to destroy it. I glanced at Elena, whose face had turned ashen, and Julian, who was now standing several feet away from her, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. He still didn't know everything, but he was about to. Elena, I said, turning toward her, you faked your death, left your children without a mother, and started a new life. That much is clear. But what's truly astonishing is how you funded that new life. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. She knew where this was going. I pulled out a folder, thick with documents, and held it up for the room to see. Here we have bank statements showing the withdrawals you made from our joint accounts in the months leading up to your death. You drained everything, leaving me with barely enough to keep the lights on. And here, I continued, flipping through the pages, are the legal documents proving you funneled that money into offshore accounts under a fake name. Clever, really, but not clever enough. The crowd gasped, the weight of my words sinking in. Elena tried to step forward, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but I wasn't finished. And Julian, I said, turning my gaze to her lover, did you know she's been doing the same to you? His face turned red, then pale, as I pulled out another set of documents. Elena has been siphoning money from your business for years. Tens of thousands, if not more. I took the liberty of having an auditor look into your accounts. Turns out, she's been planning her escape from you, too. Julian turned to Elena, his voice shaking. Is this true? Did you? She stammered, Julian, I can explain. The money you siphoned from Julian? Returned. And as for your fake identity, well, I smirked, pulling out one last document. I made sure the authorities are very interested in that. The color drained from her face as the implications set in. She wasn't just humiliated. She was ruined. And the best part? She had done it to herself. James, please, she finally managed, her voice trembling. For the sake of the kids. The kids? I barked, my anger finally breaking through. You don't get to use them as an excuse. You forfeited your right to be their mother the moment you walked out that door. They don't need you. They never did. With that, I stepped away, leaving her to the judgmental eyes of the crowd and the weight of her own sins. Julian stormed out, cursing under his breath, while Elena stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as the reality of her downfall set in. The room erupted in whispers, but I didn't care. I walked over to my kids, wrapping them in a hug and assuring them that everything was going to be okay. Because for the first time in 10 years, it finally was. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Elena was no longer a shadow hanging over my life. She was a ghost, buried under the weight of her own choices, and I was finally free. Revenge wasn't sweet, it was necessary. And in the end, it wasn't about destroying her. It was about reclaiming myself, my family, and my future. And that was worth every second. There's a certain calm that comes after a storm. Not the peaceful, serene kind that poets write about, but the eerie kind, the one that leaves destruction in its wake and silence that's heavier than any sound. That's what the room felt like after I walked away from Elena, her lies exposed, her carefully constructed fantasy crumbling before her very eyes. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I stood at the edge of the crowd, my children flanking me, their hands gripping mine. My daughter looked up at me, confusion and hurt etched across her face. "Dad, is it true? Is she really? Mom?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it sliced through me like a blade. How do you explain to your child that the mother they mourned, the woman they cried for, wasn't just gone but had willingly abandoned them? I crouched down, looking her in the eyes, and said the only thing I could. "Yes, it's true. But she stopped being the mom you knew a long time ago." It was the truth, but it didn't make it any easier to say. I felt her grip tighten as the weight of it all settled on her young shoulders. My son, younger and more naive, clung to my side, his small voice trembling. "Why did she leave us, Dad?" That question, the one I had asked myself over and over for years, the one that had haunted me, kept me awake at night, and eaten away at whatever shred of peace I had left. And now, it was their question too, one I didn't have a good answer for. "She made a choice," I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "And that choice had nothing to do with you. She left because of her, not because of anything you did. You hear me? This is not your fault." They nodded, their small faces brave but broken. It was a moment I'd been dreading for years, the moment I had to peel back the shield I'd built to protect them from the truth. But I had no choice. Elena had forced my hand. Behind me, the murmurs of the crowd grew louder. Some were expressing sympathy for me, others whispering words of outrage at Elena. But there were a few who took her side, whispering about second chances and forgiveness. Their words burned in my ears, but I kept my composure. I wasn't about to let anyone rewrite the narrative of what had happened here. I turned back toward Elena, who was still standing near the podium, her head bowed, her hands trembling. She looked up at me then, her tear-streaked face a mask of desperation. "James, please," she said, her voice breaking. "You have to let me explain. For the kids, for us. For us." I interrupted, my voice rising. "There is no us, Elena. There hasn't been for 10 years. The moment you walked out that door, the moment you decided your new life was worth more than your family, you ended whatever US there was." The room went silent again, all eyes on us. I could feel the weight of their stares, but I didn't care. This wasn't about them. This was about me, my kids, and the woman who had betrayed us in the worst way possible. "You think you can just walk back in here, after all this time, and pretend like nothing happened? Like we're some happy little family you can pick up where you left off?" I took a step closer to her, my voice trembling with controlled fury. "You don't get to do that, Elena. You don't get to rewrite the story. Not this time." Tears streamed down her face, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "You abandoned your children. You left me to pick up the pieces of a life you shattered. And now you expect forgiveness? Redemption? You don't deserve it." I turned to the crowd then, addressing them as much as her. "You all heard what she did. You all saw the proof. So let me be clear. This is not a woman seeking forgiveness. This is a woman who has run out of places to hide. She's not here because she cares about us. She's here because her lies finally caught up with her." Elena sank to her knees, sobbing, but I felt no pity. Not anymore. She had chosen her path, and now she was facing the consequences. I leaned down, my voice low but cold. "You're not here to make amends, Elena. You're here because you lost everything. And now, so will you." I straightened, turning to the security guards I had stationed at the door. "Escort her out," I said, my tone final. "She's not welcome here." The guard stepped forward, but Elena grabbed my arm, her voice frantic. "Please, James, don't do this. I made a mistake, but I'm still their mother." I pulled my arm free, my gaze hard. "You made your choice, Elena. Now live with it." As they led her away, the weight on my chest began to lift. It wasn't complete closure. I knew the scars she'd left on my family would take years to heal, but it was a start. For the first time in a decade, I felt like I had reclaimed something she had stolen from me. My power, my voice, my family. I looked at my children, their faces a mix of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. "Let's go home," I said softly, wrapping my arms around them. "We don't need her. We never did." And in that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge isn't about hurting the person who wronged you. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to destroy. And as I walked out of that room, holding my children close, I knew we were finally free. I stood there for a moment, watching as the guards escorted Elena out of the room. Her once proud shoulders slumped, her head hung low, and her sobs echoed faintly down the hallway. It should have felt like a victory, a moment of triumph, but instead, all I felt was cold, steely resolve. This wasn't over, not yet. The room was still buzzing with whispers. Guests exchanged wide-eyed glances, some murmuring in shock, others shaking their heads in disgust. A few brave souls approached me, offering hesitant words of sympathy, but I brushed them off. I didn't need their pity, their opinions, or their half-hearted reassurances. I only needed one thing: for everyone to understand the full extent of Elena's betrayal. I returned to the podium, gripping its edges as I stared out at the crowd. The room fell silent again, their attention snapping back to me. "I know many of you are shocked by what you just witnessed," I began, my voice calm but firm. "Some of you may even feel sorry for her. But let me be clear. Elena is not the victim here." I let my words hang in the air for a moment, scanning the room for any dissent. No one dared to speak. "She didn't just abandon me and our children," I continued. "She stole from us. She lied to us. And she built an entirely new life while we were left to pick up the pieces. She didn't care about the pain she caused, the lives she shattered. She only cared about herself." I saw a few heads nodding in agreement, their faces hardening as the reality sank in. Good. They needed to understand. This wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a cautionary tale about the consequences of selfishness and deceit. "Elena thought she could waltz back into our lives and rewrite the narrative," I said, my voice rising slightly. "She thought she could manipulate us, play the victim, and make us forget what she did. But here's the thing about lies. They always catch up with you." I reached for the remote control again, clicking it to display a final set of images on the screen. These weren't just photos of her and Julian living their fantasy life. These were photos of her children, my children, over the years. Milestones she missed. Birthdays, school plays, soccer games. Moments that should have been shared as a family, but instead became painful reminders of her absence. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is what she gave up. This is what she chose to abandon. And no amount of tears, no desperate pleas for forgiveness, will ever change that." The room was deathly quiet now, the weight of my words pressing down on everyone present. Even those who had initially shown sympathy for Elena now looked horrified, their expressions a mix of guilt and disbelief. "I want you all to remember this moment," I said, stepping away from the podium. "Not because it's a spectacle, but because it's a reminder. A reminder that our actions have consequences. A reminder that betrayal doesn't go unnoticed. And a reminder that sometimes, the best thing you can do is let someone face the full weight of their choices." As I stepped down, the crowd parted for me, their faces a blur as I made my way back to my children. My daughter was holding my son's hand tightly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at me, like I was her anchor in the storm, said more than words ever could. The party didn't last much longer. People began to trickle out, offering me quiet nods of respect as they left. Some stopped to thank me for my honesty, for my strength, but I barely registered their words. My focus was solely on my children, ensuring they felt safe, loved, and supported in the aftermath of it all. As the last guest left, I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. The venue was quiet now, the echoes of the earlier chaos fading into the background. My daughter sat beside me, her head resting on my shoulder. "Dad," she whispered, her voice small but steady. "You did the right thing." Her words hit me harder than anything else that day. For so long, I had doubted myself, wondering if my plan for this confrontation was too harsh, too calculated. But hearing her say those words, knowing she understood why I had to do it, made it all worth it. Elena's public humiliation wasn't just about revenge. It was about accountability. It was about showing her, and everyone else, that actions have consequences, that you can't run from your choices forever. She thought she could walk back into our lives as if nothing had happened, but now she knew the truth. There was no coming back from this. And as I sat there, holding my children close, I realized that this wasn't just the end of her story. It was the beginning of ours. A story of resilience, of rebuilding, and of moving forward without the shadows of the past dragging us down. We didn't need her. We never did. And now, the world knew it too. I thought I'd feel lighter after the party, after Elena's public disgrace, after the truths I had buried for years finally came to light. I thought the weight would lift from my shoulders. But it didn't. Not entirely. Because I knew there was one last piece of this story that hadn't been written yet. Elena wasn't just humiliated. She was cornered. And like any cornered animal, she was bound to lash out. The next morning, I got the call I had been expecting. It was from her, of course. Her voice was shaky, a mix of anger, desperation, and something that sounded dangerously close to regret. "James, we need to talk." I almost laughed at the audacity. Talk? About what, Elena? I think I said everything I needed to last night. Her tone hardened. "You didn't have to do it like that. In front of everyone? You've ruined my life." I let out a bitter chuckle. "Ruined your life? Elena, you faked your death, abandoned your children, and stole from me. Don't talk to me about ruined lives." She was quiet for a moment, and I could almost picture her sitting in whatever sad little corner she had retreated to, trying to piece together her next move. "James," she said finally, her voice softening, "I made mistakes, but I'm still their mother. Let me see them, please." It was the plea I had been waiting for, the moment where she would try to twist my resolve, to use our children as her way back in. But I wasn't the same man she had left behind. I had spent years building a fortress around myself and my kids, and she wasn't about to breach it. "No," I said firmly. "You lost that right the day you walked away. You don't get to come back now and pretend you care." "But they need me," she cried. "You can't just erase me from their lives." "They don't need you, Elena," I replied, my voice cold and unyielding. "They've grown up without you. They've thrived without you. The only thing you'd bring into their lives now is chaos. And I won't let that happen." She started sobbing then, the kind of dramatic display that might have worked on me 10 years ago. But not now. Not anymore. I waited for her to calm down, and when she finally did, I delivered the final blow. "You want to see them? You want to be part of their lives? Then prove you deserve it. Turn yourself in." Her sharp intake of breath told me I had hit the mark. Turn myself in? For what? For fraud, for theft, for abandoning your family, I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "You think you can just walk away from all of this without consequences? You broke the law, Elena, and I've got all the evidence to make sure you pay for it." She started sputtering, trying to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. "I've already contacted the authorities," I continued. "They know everything. The stolen money, the fake identity, all of it. You have two choices. Turn yourself in, or wait for them to find you. Either way, you're going to face justice." Her silence was deafening. For the first time, she had nothing to say. No excuses, no manipulations, no empty promises. She knew she was facing years behind bars, and for the first time in a decade, I felt like justice had been served. But the real victory wasn't in her downfall. It was in the strength I had found in myself and my children. We had survived her betrayal, her lies, her abandonment, and now, we were free to move forward without her shadow looming over us. As I sat with my kids that evening, watching them laugh and play without a care in the world, I realized something profound. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reclamation, reclaiming your life, your peace, and your power. And for the first time in years, I felt like we had all three. Elena's story was over, but ours was just beginning. The day Elena turned herself in, I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought the weight of everything, the lies, the betrayal, the years spent questioning myself, would finally lift. And in some ways it did. But the truth is, when the dust settled, I was left with a hollow sort of quiet. The kind that forces you to sit with the reality of everything that's happened and ask yourself, what now? Elena's arrest was all over the local news. Headlines screamed about the mother who faked her death and the decade-long deception. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out, offering their shock and sympathy, some even congratulating me on my so-called victory. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not really. It felt like the inevitable conclusion to a story I never wanted to be part of. The kids, surprisingly, handled it better than I expected. My daughter, always the pragmatic one, simply nodded when I told her the news. She made her choices, Dad, she said, her voice steadier than I felt. We don't owe her anything. My son, on the other hand, struggled. He was younger when Elena left, too young to understand the full scope of what had happened. To him, she was still the mother he had idolized in his memories, the one who read him bedtime stories and kissed his scraped knees. Watching him grapple with the truth was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Is she going to jail? He asked one night, his voice small and hesitant. I nodded, unsure how to soften the blow. Good, he said after a long pause. She deserves it. Hearing that from him broke something inside me. He was too young to carry that kind of anger, too young to understand what it meant to let it go. I held him close that night, promising myself that no matter what, I would make sure he and his sister never felt the weight of their mother's choices again. Life moved on, as it always does. The house, once filled with the ghosts of what could have been, began to feel lighter. We started new traditions, movie nights, weekend hikes, Sunday morning pancakes. Little things that brought us closer together, that reminded us we were a family, even if one piece was missing. Work became my escape, my sanctuary. I poured myself into my business, expanding it further than I ever thought possible. Every milestone felt like a step forward, a way to prove to myself, and to my kids, that we didn't need Elena to thrive, that we could build something beautiful from the ashes of what she had left behind. But the true test came the day of her sentencing. I debated whether or not to attend, unsure if I wanted to see her again. In the end, I went, not for her, but for myself. I needed closure, needed to see this chapter of my life come to an official end. She looked different as she stood before the judge. Smaller, diminished, her once proud demeanor replaced by something almost unrecognizable. She glanced at me once, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Guilt? Fear? Maybe all three. But I didn't look away. I held her gaze, unflinching, as the judge read out her sentence. 8 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 5. The gavel fell, and just like that, it was over. As she was led away in handcuffs, she turned back one last time, her eyes searching mine for something. Understanding, forgiveness, maybe even love. But I gave her nothing. No nod, no smile, no acknowledgement. She didn't deserve it. Walking out of that courtroom felt like stepping into a new life. The air was crisp, the sun warm against my skin, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Truly breathe. The weight of her lies, her absence, her betrayal, it was gone. All that remained was me, my kids, and the life we were building together. It wasn't perfect. There were still scars, still nights when the memories crept in uninvited. But they didn't control me anymore. They didn't define us. We were more than the pain she had caused, more than the story she had tried to rewrite. Months turned into years, and slowly, we found our rhythm. My daughter thrived in college, carving out a path that made me prouder than I ever thought possible. My son grew into a thoughtful, kind young man, his anger giving way to a quiet strength that reminded me so much of myself. As for me, I learned to let go of the past, to focus on the present, on the moments that mattered. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had something far more powerful, peace. Elena became a ghost in our lives, a shadow that faded with time. The world moved on, and so did we. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. Not the public humiliation, not the justice served, but the simple, quiet joy of living a life free from her shadow. We were whole again, in a way we never thought possible. And as I watched my children laugh and grow, their faces lit with the kind of happiness I thought we'd lost forever. I realized something. The best revenge isn't about destroying the person who hurt you. It's about rebuilding what they tried to break and making it stronger than ever.